That's one more week behind us. Time to make a nice cup of tea and talk about some books. It's time for a weekly recap. Hey everyone, I hope you've had a really nice week and that you've been reading some good books. My reading week has been pretty good, I would say. No, that's an understatement. I'm underselling it there a little bit. It's actually been good, really good. Why did I undersell it? My reading week has been a little bit of a precursor to Halloween. I've read a couple of spooky books, and so in this video, I'm going to be talking about what I'm currently reading, what I just recently finished reading, and also what I'm looking forward to reading for the rest of the month. I'll also tell you about some of the book battles that we had over on the Discord and how they played out. I'll talk about the projects that I've been working on with my voice acting and audiobook narrating, and then I'll tell you about the movie that I saw recently, which is actually a book adaptation, so might be interesting if you've read the book as well. And then we'll update the top 10 watch list of 2025 to see if that movie made the list. But let's start by talking about what I'm currently reading, and the first book is Ubik by Philip K. Dick. What do you think of these designs? They're pretty uniform with the Philip K. Dick books. They've always got a little PKD in the bottom. They've got like the background and a little square in the center. I kind of like them. I like the design. So this book is set in a world where a portion of humanity have developed psychic abilities, and they shape everything from like company secrets, where people are trying to hack into company secrets telepathically. And you've also got people that are communicating with the dead. You've got people that are predicting accurately the future. I'm only 20% into this book so far at the moment, and what I've found so far is that there's a good balance of science fiction concepts and interesting characters. That isn't always the case with hard science fiction. Sometimes the characters feel a little bit light, and it's more about the concepts. I'd say that was true of a book that I read last month, which was called There Is No Anti-Memetics Division. I loved it. Don't get me wrong. I thought it was great. The characters were a little bit thin though, It wasn't about the characters. It was all about the concepts of self-censoring information. So, but this book here has got both. It's got interesting characters and cool sci-fi stuff. The big inciting incident of this story hasn't really happened yet. So I'm still being introduced to the abilities that the characters have. The book is really taking its time with that aspect, which I'm grateful for. I thought when I first picked it up, because of its reputation, I thought it was going to be a bit more overwhelming. Like I'd be just hit with a ton of information, the way that sci-fi sometimes does. But no, that's not the case. The book is sort of like slowly, gradually giving out information, mostly through sort of like a steady world building and character dialogue. I'm enjoying learning all about the different psychic abilities that people have. Like, for example, some characters can read minds, right? Some can block that, so they can basically block their ability if they're in the vicinity. So people will have these kind of blocking agents follow them around so that nobody can read their mind. Some people can predict the future, and it looks like there might also be characters that can maybe manipulate that a little bit, so kind of like alter their predictions so that they're making incorrect predictions. My favorite character so far is a guy named Joe Chip, and he's kind of like the everyman character, he tests people for their abilities. He doesn't have psychic abilities himself. He's like an engineer, right? So he gets out his test kit and he can test people for their abilities, and then he will recommend them to companies who use these psychics or anti-psychics. But his personal life is just a mess. He's a drunk. He's addicted to prescription drugs. He's completely broke. So he's This is how broke he is. He can't even get access to his own refrigerator. So in this world, every time you want to do anything, like open a refrigerator door, you have to put 5 cents in the refrigerator in order to activate it. It's a bit of a nightmare. So yeah, he doesn't have the 5 cents to open his fridge so that he can get the milk out of his fridge. If he wants to leave his apartment, he has to borrow money from someone so he can put 5 cents in the front door just so he can leave. So yeah, he is. He's the kind of character that I really like, which is a techie burnout loser who probably is a pretty nice guy, I would imagine. One thing that's sort of like interesting, but I don't fully understand it yet, is that at the beginning of every chapter, there's an advertisement that is promoting this mysterious product called Ubik. And Ubik just seems to be everything. Like it seems to be a cleaning product. It's also alcohol, but also it's coffee as well. And at the end of every advertisement, there's this warning that says, listen, it's not dangerous as long as you use it as advised. So yeah, I don't know what Ubik is yet, but I imagine it's pretty important since the bloody book's called Ubik. I actually put down the book just before starting recording this video. And as I put it down, I had a big smile on my face. And I was like, that was really fun. That was a fun reading session. I really enjoyed that. So yeah, it's good so far. The next book that I'm reading is The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. I was saying his name incorrectly before. I was saying Bulgakov, but it's actually Bulgakov. You got to forgive me. I'm not cultured. So this is the book that the PBJ book club selected. At the moment, it's kind of confusing, very different to most of what I read. Usually what attracts me about a book is a solid plot and just like plot progression with good pacing and really interesting characters that I can sympathize with. This book is quite light on the plot. Don't get me wrong, there are fascinating characters, but I absolutely cannot sympathize with them because it's like I don't understand them, Not yet, anyway. It's quite heavy on the allegory as well, and the symbolism. It feels very dreamlike. It feels very Kafka-esque. So if you like Kafka, then I think you would quite like this book. I like Kafka, don't get me wrong. I like a couple of his books. I really like The Metamorphoses, but there are a couple of his books, like I think The Trial I didn't really like. Just felt like hearing about someone's bad dream, it just wasn't for me. When I criticize books, I'm not saying that they're bad books or anything like that, but I'm just saying they're not to my taste, right? So it's not like I'm not passing judgment going, oh, it was crap, that's not how I look at books. So this book on the surface is about the devil and his strange entourage that arrive in Moscow during the time of the Soviet Union. If you dig just a little bit deeper, though, it's more about a satirical look at Soviet Russia in the early 1900s. It's about censorship of art and literature, and it's about sort of the smothering effect that bureaucracy can have on a population. I think some people will hear me describe that and think, I prefer it when you read Stephen King. And yeah, I totally get where you're coming from, but also it's nice as well to sometimes get outside of your comfort zone and read something totally different. I'm not going to say that I'm like struggling with it. I am enjoying it, and it's got me curious enough to the point where I'm looking up some Russian history and trying to work out what everything in this book could symbolize. I might be approaching this book in the wrong way. I might be even looking too deeply into it, and maybe I should just chill out and just enjoy the ride. But yeah, my brain just doesn't always work that way, I need everything to make sense. What's been helpful is that because this is a PBJ book club read, because we're all reading it together for the month of September, there are some people who maybe understand it in the context of the history of when it was written and what the author's intention was and that kind of thing. There's some people that are just loving it, you know. So some people are just saying, you know, I just find it hilarious. It is funny in places, definitely. I just want to say something as well about the PBJ Book Club. I think they're a little bit mental, you know. Don't get me wrong, I love them. I love everyone in that book club. We have some really great discussions. But one week, they'll pick My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix, or The Devils by Joe Abercrombie, or The Last House on Needless Street. And then the next month, they'll pick Persuasion by Jane Austen and The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov. What are we? You know what I mean? Like, what, as a group, what are we? Speaking about the book club, I'm really excited about what we're going to be reading in October. There's 5 options that are available at the moment, and because it's spooky season, right? So they're all horror books that everyone's choosing from. So I'm excited to see what they choose. So those are the books that I'm in the middle of reading, but what books have I just got finished reading? The Lesser Dead by Christopher Buehlman. From the very first pages, this book felt as though you'd sort of bumped into and befriended a vampire who decided on a whim that he was going to give you a guided tour of his underground world. The protagonist is Joey Peacock, who is a guy or a vampire who is in his 60s, but because he was turned as a child, he forever appears as a 14-year-old boy. Joey is part of a secret colony of vampires who all live together in an abandoned section of the New York City subway. Their existence in this like really heavily populated city is quite precarious, and so they live by a strict code of hunting human blood in order to remain hidden from like the NYPD. And so when a new group of these sort of strange vampire children with English accents show up and begin to hunt down people pretty recklessly, they start to like risk exposing their hidden existence of the vampires, and they put the group in danger. Right from the very opening scene, Joey Peacock, by the way, cool name. Joey Peacock, that's just a cool name. And Joey addresses us directly. It kind of has the feeling of like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, like a little peek behind the curtain to learn all about this secret society. He's kind of like conversational in the way that he speaks to the audience or to the reader. It's kind of like, psst, hey, you, jackass. Hey, you want to know about vampires? Come over here, I'll show you around. Come on, jackass, I ain't got all day. Come on, let's go. By the way, how's that New York accent? Pretty, not bad, is it? It's all right. I'd say, what, like 7 out of 10? Anyway, from that point onward, layer by layer, we're given access to the subway tunnels, to the unspoken rules, to the history of the characters that we find down underground. I've read a lot of vampire fiction, and the one thing that you often find is that vampires are kind of miserable, you know? They're pretty much always morose, they're lonely, they're brooding, they lurk in the shadows. You know, they're goths. They're goths, basically, right? Joey Peacock could not be any more different than that. He really loves pop culture in the 70s. He is an old man, but he is forever trapped in the body of a teenager. So he's kind of like half wisecracking teenager, half weary predator. He loves going to discos and hanging out with really cool people. He likes, like I say, pop culture. He loves all of the celebrities. He loves talking about all the different celebrities. He is addicted to TV. He can be immature and irresponsible, but he uses his powers, I would say, just to have as much fun as possible. He lets us know that he is an unreliable narrator. Like at the very beginning of the book, he tells us, and you shouldn't believe everything that he says. You're never quite sure where you stand with him. But I think that's what makes him fun. He's kind of unpredictable. Even the way that he talks is a little bit unsteady. He's constantly going off on these little tangents. Like he'll be talking about creeping around and having to be quiet. And he's kind of like a ninja. And then he'll start telling you about how cool ninjas are and a little bit of ninja history. And then he'll sort of turn around and go, by the way, did I ever tell you that I'm pretty good with nunchucks? Yeah. I've got a lot of experience with nunchucks. Then you've got Margaret, who is the like self-appointed mayor of the vampire New York underground. She's definitely a complicated character. She rules with an iron fist and she absolutely will not be questioned by anyone in the group. She's the one that's come up with all of the rules that everybody has to follow in order to keep their little gang from being discovered. Although it is like rules, what's the saying? Rules for thee, but not for me, or whatever that saying is. Yeah, she just basically kills whoever she wants, whenever she wants, and she hands out punishments to anyone whenever she feels like it. She's originally from Ireland, and if you get the chance, I would actually recommend, it's one of those books where I would recommend that you listen to the audiobook because, yeah, I got the audiobook on Libby, so I was lucky enough to sort of like listen to it and then also like be reading it at the same time as well. And the audiobook is actually narrated by Christopher Buehlman. Usually, when an author narrates their own book, it's a bit of a mess, you know. Not to pat myself on the back too much. I'm an audiobook narrator, right? But not to pat myself on the back too much. But I do think it is a bit of a skill that has to be developed over time. You know, normally the first couple of books that you do, it's a little bit sketchy. You know, I don't know how many audiobooks Christopher Buehlman has narrated, but he's a pro. Like he's so good at narrating, doing all the different voices. And actually, he does a perfect Irish accent. How's he doing that? Normally, no offense, but Americans cannot do an Irish accent. Usually when they try, it sounds a little bit like a leprechaun, you know, like that Lucky Charms, was that Lucky Charms cereal that you have? Yeah, it kind of sounds like that. Oh, lordy, 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 lordy. Yeah, everyone just sounds like a leprechaun. But he's nailed it. Like, it's just like a nice little lilting voice that he's got. It's good. Another character who's great is Svetko, who was transformed into a vampire when he was an old man. And so it's kind of funny because even though he and Joey are roughly about the same age, Svetko is kind of like a surrogate father to Joey, right? Because I think just because they've assumed the roles of what they appear to be. So Svetko appears to be this old man, Joey appears to be this kid, and so they have this kind of father-son relationship. Yeah, I like Svetko. He's very scholarly. He plans to spend eternity just reading and collecting books. He's gentle and he's kind. Even with his victims, it's kind of like he courts them. You know, he wants them, if they're going to be fed on by a vampire, he at least wants them to have a nice experience of it. And so he'll try and treat them as well as he can. So yeah, I like Svetko a lot. There's a bunch of other vampires in the community. I'm not going to go over all of them. I think there's about 17 in total. So yeah, I'm not going to tell you about all of them. But those are my three favorite ones, with Joey being like the main protagonist. The villains in this story are pretty scary. They're like I said to you, a group of new vampires who move into our vampires' territory and they start messing around with the system, hunting a bit too recklessly. I don't know if you can 100% call them villains or if maybe they're just like a massive pain in the ass that are destabilizing everything and the system that Margaret has put together. So yeah, they're kind of annoying. I was just speaking about how good Christopher Buehlman's voice acting was. And actually, he does these little English creepy kids really good as well. Somehow he's able to make each of these English children sound distinct from one another, but still all like little English kids. He's very good. I really can't praise his narration enough, to be honest. These vampires are extra creepy because they all have child's faces and child's bodies. And as any horror fan will tell you, nothing, right? Not vampires, not werewolves, not ghosts or zombies or anything. Nothing is scarier than a little kid, right? They're terrifying. That's why I don't have them. Can you imagine if you had them in the house? Kids in the house, you'd be like, oh my God, what's that thing gonna do now? You just come down in the morning, it's eating its cereal, and it's just like, hello, father. You know, I'm only joking. I love kids, and I've got nieces and nephews, and they're really cute and everything. But yeah, they can't come in my house though. These little vampire kids are especially creepy because they turn hunting people into kind of like a game. It's like they're playing with their food, and they really enjoy it. They kill people in pretty creepy ways. I said creepy too much. Anyway, yeah, I really like the mood and the tone of this book. In fiction, New York can be just so many things, can't it? You know, sometimes New York City is kind of glitzy and glamorous, and I love reading about this version of New York that's represented in this book. It's kind of similar to how it's portrayed in Taxi Driver. It's all gritty. It's covered with graffiti and in decay, and crime is everywhere, and every alleyway contains a new danger, you know? And since these kids are like kind of allergic to sunlight, a lot of the story takes place underground, and certain elements of their life underground add to the existing vampire lore that we know. And you learn, for example, why they prefer to sleep in coffins or like boxes as opposed to out in the open, and how they're able to sort of charm people. That kind of thing is really interesting. Again, I like the writing style, the way that it's written in a sort of personable way. I don't know how he's done it, but the whole book just felt like a conversation. I haven't read prose like that since I read Dolores Claiborne by Stephen King. It's written in that kind of way, you know. Yeah, obviously it's in first person. Lots of books are written in first person, but it's more than that. It's like you're being personally addressed the whole time. Sometimes Joey's gonna check in on you and say to you, like, "Oh, did I tell you about this already? I think I might have already told you about this. Sometimes I repeat myself. Sorry about that. Oh, but I didn't tell you about this part yet. Okay, good. All right, now settle in. I'm gonna tell you about a different story that happened on another side of town. You know, it's and then he continues with a story. This book has a lot to say about the importance of finding a community and a family of people who are like you and understand you, people who you share rituals with and interests with, and how being an outsider can sometimes bring you closer together with people that are like you. Like, for example, I am a weirdo, right? And here you all are. We found each other. The next book I read this week was a pretty chunky one, The End of the World as We Know It. I didn't read this whole book in a week. I actually started it last month, but whenever I talk about what I've read, I talk about when I finished it. When I first read Stephen King's The Stand, it was such a visceral experience. It felt like stepping straight into the end of the world with the outbreak, the government scrambling, not knowing what to do, society is crumbling into chaos, and all of the dangerous people that previously existed on the fringes of society now start coming inland and start to twist what is left of the world into what they want it to be. And then, immediately afterwards, the silence. The Stand is still one of my all-time favorite Stephen King books, but even back then when I was reading it, I remember thinking to myself, when I got done with it, man, I wish there was more. And now, there is. This is a collection of 34 original stories written by some of the biggest names in sci-fi, contemporary horror. I mean, the author list is is nuts. It's nuts. You've got Josh Malaman, Ronald Malfi, Poppy Z. Bright, Chuck Wendig, Nat Cassidy, S.A. Cosby, Katrina Ward, and a bunch of other really like recognizable names if you read genre fiction. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite stories from the collection. Don't worry, there's not going to be any spoilers or anything like that. But yeah, I'm just going to tell you which ones were my favorite and if I enjoyed myself with this book or not. Unfortunately, none of the stories are written by Stephen King, but the book opens up with an introduction by Stephen King where he kind of talks about when he was first approached about this project and what his initial response was, and that was to say, no, 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 no. I think he kind of expresses what I think it would feel like for an actor or a musician to be given a Lifetime Achievement Award. When you receive that, it's nice, but it feels like, all right, that's it now. That puts a cap on your career. You've done all of your best work, and this is the end of the story. Congratulations, well done. All the younger up-and-comers get to clap you and see you off. Go on, Grandpa, get going. And that was the kind of, that's not how he worded it, right? But that's sort of like, it felt like that was the idea that he was expressing. And reading that introduction by Stephen King, I know it's a little bit weird to say this, but got a little bit choked up about it, you know? Because, you know, like I said, he was saying, oh, no, you know, my best days are still ahead of me. I've still got some great books in me. So that's the reason that he rejected it initially. But then he had a hip replacement, and then he was walking around his house using a walker and now using a cane. And then he started to like view the book a little bit differently, the project a little bit differently. And he thought to himself, I don't know, maybe I am old. And that's just sad, man, you know? I mean, I think that Stephen King is still, you know, to this day, he's still putting out great books. But it really got me thinking about like how there's not really anyone else today that's like Stephen King who has written so many books across so many different genres and reinvented the genres as well. On top of that, like every decade, he's released a handful of bangers, you know, like in the 70s when he was first starting out, obviously he had Carrie and The Shining. And then in the 80s, we got It and Misery. And then in the 90s, we got The Green Mile and Needful Things. And then since the 2000s, we've had 11/22/63, which is my favorite Stephen King book. And we also got a lot of the books that kind of provided the resolution to the Dark Tower series. We got the Hollyverse, and it just made me think to myself, like, we're lucky. We're lucky that we got to have him, you know? And I hope he continues writing for a long time. But yeah, when I read that, it sort of took me by surprise a little bit, you know? I was like, So yeah, I think it's nice that, you know, this collection of writers on the back all got their chance to show how much they love the worlds that Stephen King has created and also add their own chapter to it. I think that's generous of Stephen King to let them do that and to give them a platform, even though a lot of them are like really famous writers anyway. Still, you know, there's some slightly lesser known writers and they're getting a platform as well. And I just think it's nice that he offered that. And I think it's nice that they wanted to do that. One of the things that I really liked about this collection of stories is that it kind of like follows the timeline of the original book and it's separated into 4 sections. The opening section is called Down with the Sickness, where progressively the virus starts to spread throughout the world. We start off when the disease called Captain Trips is just a little bit of a rumor. You know, and people aren't fully sold on the idea that this is real or that this is going to be a big problem. Anyone that's like reacting to it or takes it seriously is being told that they're crazy and they're overreacting. You know, it's just going to be like a harsh summer cold, you know? Don't overreact. Don't be so dramatic. And that's the mood of the characters for the first handful of stories. I really liked the opening story called Room 24 by Carolyn Kepnes. If you've ever seen the show You, I think it's on Netflix. My wife loves it. I sound like Columbo. My wife, oh, by the way, my wife loves you. Yeah. My wife loves you. Have you ever seen the show on Netflix? Yeah. She wrote the book that show was based on. And her story is about a cop named Abel who has fantasies of being a hero to a woman who is being physically abused by her husband. And so he makes regular house calls to sort of check up on her. And in the background, you get little hints that people are starting to take the superflu more seriously. I think this is one of the short stories that felt the most like a Stephen King book. Not taking anything away from the author. In fact, I mean that as a bit of a compliment. Like, she was really able to capture the tone and create some compelling characters in a short amount of time, and she didn't have to fully rely because it's quite early in the timeline of The Stand. She didn't really have to rely too much on the source material. Again, this is a book that could have just existed as a standalone story that didn't happen in the universe of The Stand. But as the stories progress, you can tell that they're running in line with their narrative. Another great story is Lockdown, written by Bev Vincent, about a community that are all living on an island. I think it's just like off the East Coast. And they're like this close-knit community who have a town meeting where they share what they've heard about the virus, and it's spreading on the mainland. And so they decide that, look, right now we are all disease-free. And so we're going to lock down this island. No one's coming in. People can leave if they want, but if they leave, they can't come back. But then they have to sort of face the question of, okay, so we've made this decision, but how are we going to enforce it if boats start coming in from the mainland? That's an interesting one. I like that one a lot. Lenora by Jonathan Jans is another good one about a man who's grieving the loss of his wife and child, and he adopts this dik-dik, which I didn't know what it was, but it's kind of like a tiny little chihuahua-sized antelope. And it's like an endangered species. I suppose everything is an endangered species in this world. But he is distracting himself from the chaos that's happening out in the world by making it his purpose to care for this little creature. And you can imagine that this is a pretty emotional one, right? Because he's lost his family and now his whole world has become this little creature that really needs him. So I like that one a lot. Another one that I really enjoyed from the early first section was Wrong Fucking Place, Wrong Fucking Time by C. Robert Cargill. This is, I think, more of a fun book about a group of guys who are living in this small town in Texas who, after everyone dies in their little town, they start hanging out together and watching horror movies and drinking beer and stuff like that. They're all discussing film theory and how slasher movies can be cathartic. Then, so that's the first section. Then we move into the next section, which is called The Long Walk, right? So that's another homage to Stephen King. And in this section, the characters all begin their journey to new destinations, right? This is when the virus has fully taken hold. And in this section, in a lot of the stories, dreams play a big part, like kind of how they do in The Stand. And so a lot of the characters in this collection are having similar dreams to the characters from The Stand. I'm not going to spoil The Stand, by the way, just in case you're sort of getting a bit nervous, like, oh, is he going to tell me what happens in The Stand? I'm going to give like an outline, but I'm not going to spoil any big moments or tell you about any characters or anything like that. But yeah, this is the section where dreams start directing characters, and if you've read The Stand, you might have like an idea of these locations that many of these characters might be heading to. This section opens up with a story that I actually really liked called I Love the Dead by Josh Malaman. This is about an obsessive Jerry Garcia fan. He's like a super fan. And he carries an acoustic guitar around on his back, even though he can't play guitar. And he's kind of, I thought that was a funny detail that he's just like walking around like a rock star, but he can't play anything. And he feels like he's on like a pilgrimage to Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco to see if Jerry Garcia is still alive. In this section of the book, it felt to me anyway, and maybe this is just my own reading tastes, but it felt to me as though the names were starting to get a little more recognizable. Like I say, you had Josh Malaman, and then the immediate story that followed that was The Legion of Swine by S.A. Cosby. This story is about a pig farmer who has lost his family. That's probably like redundant to say that he's lost his family, to be honest. I've said that a couple of times. You can safely assume that everyone has lost their family. And now he just wants to be left alone, but he realizes that he might not be able to avoid what is happening in the world. He gets some visitors that kind of like interrupt his life and everything, and things get crazy from there. In this story, S.A. Cosby also has the coolest way to describe the sharpness of a knife. I loved it. It was one of my favorite. I don't know why. It was just a little throwaway quote, S.A. Cosby, he can just do that. He can just go, oh yeah, have that, and you just go, oh wow, thanks. That was really cool. Yeah, so let me know if you read that line and if you like that line. But it's one of those where it made me wish that Frank Mueller was still alive to narrate it, because I just think that he would have made it sound even cooler if he read it. There's also a couple of stories that are set outside of the US, and I was grateful for that, because whenever I read these books or see these dystopian movies like The Stand or The Walking Dead or Hunger Games or Swan Song, I always wonder, because they're usually set in the US, I always wonder, what's going on in the rest of the world? And so, yeah, we got a couple of stories like that. There's one called Across the Pond by V. Castro, set in England. There's another one, The Mosque at the End of the World by Usman T. Malik, and that is set in Pakistan. So it kind of like answered those questions a little bit. And then you get the final two sections. The next one's called Life Was Such a Wheel, which is actually based after the events of The Stand. My favorite story from this was Grand Junction by Chuck Wendig, and this felt like a dystopian Western where a bunch of gunslingers, not like gunslingers from the Dark Tower, just in the regular sense, like, gunslingers. They are all loading up and going on a manhunt for a dangerous criminal. And then, so I like that one. The fourth and final section is titled Other Worlds Than These, a little nod to the Dark Tower there. Do any of these stories link up with the Dark Tower? Maybe. Hey, maybe. I don't know. What do you think? I'm not going to tell you. You'll have to find out for yourself, baby. Sorry for calling you baby. In this section, I love the story called and I'm going to struggle to say this one, The Unfortunate Convalescence of the Super Lawyer. And that was written by Nat Cassidy. It's so clear to me when I was reading this how much of a fan Cassidy is of Stephen King. There's lots of little nods to his work here and there. And I think this book was maybe one of my favorites, if not my favorite in the whole collection. So what am I going to be reading next? For sure, I'm going to be finishing Ubik. I'm going to try and wrap my head around The Master and Margarita. That's asking a lot to read both of these books simultaneously. I think that's a lot. But once I'm done with them, I get to move on to the library at Mount Char, which I think after this, I'm just going to be a drooling mess, Oh, man. And if you want to keep up on a more consistent basis with the reviews and what I'm reading at any moment, then you can follow me on Goodreads as well, which is the same name as this channel, Paperback Journeys. So let's talk a little bit about my audiobook narrating. Working on a couple of fantasy books at the moment, and I'll talk about those. But I also narrated a short story that was chosen by some of the Patreon members, and it's called The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. That was a lot of fun. And so what I'm going to do is at the end of this video, I'll link that. I'll link that so you can click on it and you can hear my narration of that. It's a bit of a classic horror. So if you don't really like sort of classic gothic horror, just give it a swerve. You don't need to listen to it. But if you do like Edgar Allan Poe and maybe you're curious about what it sounds like when I narrate a book, I sound very different to this. I really put on a voice for it. You can check that out. So let's talk about the movie that I watched. I watched a film called The Life of Chuck, starring Tom Hiddleston. So this is a movie that is told in reverse. It's a 3-act structure, and we start with Act 3. For those of you that don't know, this film was based on a short story by Stephen King that was published in 2020. This is actually the 3rd Stephen King book that Mike Flanagan, the director, has directed. He also directed Gerald's Game and Doctor Sleep, which I think a lot of people really liked. And he is set to direct the Dark Tower series when that's released. So, I mean, it seems like the two of them have got a great creative relationship going. The Life of Chuck is one of those bittersweet stories. And I think that that's something that Stephen King just does so well, kind of presenting us with a regular everyday life and making that life feel epic and sort of like seeing the beauty in the mundane. At the very beginning, it's not quite clear what's going on. You've got a teacher that is giving a lesson in class where the class are all reading Walt Whitman's poem, Song of Myself, which features the line, "I am large, I contain multitudes." And this poem is pretty relevant to the themes of this movie. It's the idea that inside each person, you can be both brave and you can sometimes be a coward. And sometimes you can be kind and sometimes you can be cruel. And all of these different things can be contained inside of one person. Outside of the classroom, we learn that the earth is basically falling apart. It's not quite clear when this is supposed to be set, but it looks pretty much like modern day, except there's constant earthquakes that are happening and wildfires and bridges that are collapsing every day. The internet is down. It just doesn't work anymore. The TV stations are all shutting down. And everyone is afraid that, oh no, this is the end of the world. And then we move backwards from the 3rd act to the 2nd act. And this is where we're introduced to a character named Chuck, right, from the titular character. And then from there, we move back again into the 1st act. And this is Chuck's childhood. I think the cast is really good. Tom Hiddleston and Jacob Tremblay both play different versions of Chuck at different times in his life. I think this is really great casting because when you look at them, they kind of look alike a little bit. Like I mentioned, this film is told in reverse. And so it's interesting to see how he develops and what Chuck turned out to be. So as an adult, we see that Chuck is an accountant. He attends business conferences and he talks on business panels. And he doesn't seem like he's just like totally enthused about his life. He's kind of like just going along like a lot of us, like most of us, right? He's just kind of like trying to make the best of it. Maybe he didn't achieve all of his wildest dreams. But then later, what's kind of like sad about it is that later when we go back in time, we get to see him as a child and we find out what kind of boy he was and what kind of what his dreams were and how people reacted to those dreams. I think this film has a lot to do with like conformity and breaking out of the box that people always try and put you in. Oh, you should be doing this with your life. You should be doing that with your life. But I think it handles that in like a realistic way. you know, little attainable acts of defiance, small moments of bravery that sort of allow you to live outside of your comfort zone, you know? I think my main complaint, though, about this movie is that the chapters were a little bit uneven, right? So we actually, I would say, to be generous, we get about 10 or 15 minutes of Tom Hiddleston. That the Tom Hiddleston scene, the second act, and the rest is just like Jacob Tremblay as a young as Chuck as a young boy. Um, I didn't really feel like I fully got to know the adult version of Chuck, and I think it would have made it a bit more emotional if I had a better idea of. Well, I mean, look, like the movie is called The Life of Chuck, right? And I just don't think when it comes to Chuck that we really got to know much about his life. The trailer definitely made it feel like this is a Tom Hiddleston movie. You know, there's all these clips of Tom Hiddleston doing this. I'm not going to say what he does, but, you know, lots and lots of clips of Tom Hiddleston. And so I thought, oh, great. You know, I really like Tom Hiddleston. But yeah, I would say more than him is definitely featured Jacob Tremblay. Also, Mark Hamill is in this film a lot. Mark Hamill plays his grandfather, who's kind of mysterious in a way. There's a little bit of magical realism in this film as well, which, again, you know, like I never really felt like I got a proper feel for the supernatural stuff. It's only really hinted at for like most of the movie. Karen Gillian and Chiwetel Ejiofor play a divorced couple who are reconsidering their lives and their breakup at the start of the movie when the world is kind of all falling apart. And they were both really good as well. And Nick Offerman is kind of like the faceless narrator that's telling the story of the life of Chuck. I thought the film was like really beautiful, both for like the story and also the way it looks was nice as well. There's this nice like sweet score in the background, which kind of like captures that like bittersweet feeling of the film. I think it's a very sentimental kind of a film. The way that it's shot is kind of cool as well. I don't know if this is like 100% correct, but just in my memory, the beginning scenes where we've got like the apocalypse and everything like that, all of the colors felt a bit muted and dull. And then as we go further back into the past, everything starts to get more colorful and more vibrant. And I thought that was a cool thing. Like for the whole film though, it felt like everything was just building up into this ending, this big moment where everything is going to get tied together and, you know, it's going to be this life affirming moment. And I'll say this, if you've ever watched this channel before, you've probably heard me say, it's pretty easy to make me cry, you know? It's kind of easy to make me cry. Like, I'm just a very emotional person. But by the end of this movie, bone dry, baby. I just kept waiting for that moment when all of the feelings would really overwhelm me, but that moment just didn't come. There was way too little Tom Hiddleston, way too much Jacob Tremblay. I like Jacob Tremblay, you know what I mean? But I would have liked it to be a bit more balanced. So yeah, I've got complicated feelings about the movie because on one hand, I was smiling all the way through it. Like it's not like I didn't like it. I enjoyed myself. I would probably recommend that people see it if they like that kind of film. Like if you like Forrest Gump and that sort of thing, then you'll probably like this. But it's not at the same level of Forrest Gump. You know, I watch Forrest Gump and I'm like, oh, all of the emotions, laughing, crying, you know, bit scared. No, I'm not really scared. Why would I be scared of Forrest Gump? Vietnam. But yeah, I would say if you enjoyed this film, I think you'd also like The Tree of Life. I think you would like A Ghost Story, the one directed by David Lowery. And you would also like Boyhood as well. For my Letterboxd score, I think I gave it a 3.5. And if you want to follow me on Letterboxd, same deal, right? Links in the description below. But here's the big question. Did The Life of Chuck make it onto my top 10 list for 2025? Let's take a look at the list as it currently stands. And as you can see, in the number 10 spot, we've got Warfare, followed by White Lotus, then F1, which I saw really recently at the cinema, Superman, The Ballad of Wallace Island, Conclave, Sinners, weapons, and then in that number one spot, adolescence. And so did The Life of Chuck make it onto my top 10 list for 2025? Unfortunately not. Sorry, Chucky boy, you didn't quite cut it, mate, but it was good. I liked it. I'd say this is the perfect film to watch on a Sunday evening, you know? Just when you're sort of relaxing, you want something to pick up your mood a little bit. Yeah, chuck it on. So, other than that, over on the Discord, as always, we're having a lot of fun on there. Just want to say thank you to the Order of Discordia. All of their lovely faces are popping up right below me. And we had some book battles on the Discord this week. Book battles are where we pit authors and books and different series and genres and all this kind of bookish stuff. We kind of pit them together against each other in these head-to-head battles. And this week, we had a bit of a canine face-off with Ghost from Game of Thrones and Night Eyes from the Farseer trilogy. And the winner of that battle, pretty close, was Ghost with 65%. And then we got a little bit classy, a little bit above our station. Only joking. We had Homer versus Virgil. And the winner of that battle was Homer. I'm not going to do a Simpsons joke. I'm not going to do a Simpsons joke. I'm not going to do a Simpsons joke. So yeah, as I say, book battles are one of the games that we play over on the Discord. If you want to join on, suggest some matchups and things like that, or just talk about what books you're currently reading and get some recommendations. Links in the description to that as well. All about the description today, I guess. All right, so I'm just about to ask you the big question of the week. But just before I do that, I want to take a moment to thank all of the Patreon members for supporting this channel. A big thank you to the cult members. A massive thank you to the named men, and an extra special thank you to the quartet. All of you make this channel possible, and I'm so glad that we get to build this reading community together. Seriously, thanks so much for being a part of it. Okay, so here's the big question of the week. Since, we're coming into spooky season, what is the book which scared you more than any other book, and why was it scary? Only include that second part if you can avoid spoilers, right? So try and talk around the spoilers. Anyway, thanks so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. And as always, happy reading. I hope you have a lovely Sunday.